Good morning. It's Monday morning, and I want to share with you. I have been in 2 Corinthians, and I'm still there. And last week I got to chapter 9 and kind of been thinking on something in chapter 9 ever since that point, and I want to share it with you this morning. So 2 Corinthians 9, verse 6 through 8, Paul writes, he says, "But I say this, that he who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and he who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. So let each one give as he purposes in his heart, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loves a cheerful giver. And God is able to make all grace abound toward you, that you always, having all sufficiency in all things, may have an abundance for every good work." That last part just makes me smile because I feel like there's such a contrast here of what Paul is writing. On one hand, he, in the first few verses, he's talking about man's part, our responsibility, what we bring to the table. Are we going to sow sparingly? Then we're going to reap sparingly. Are we going to sow bountifully? Then we're going to reap bountifully. But then he contrasts it with what God is capable, what God brings to the table. And you know, I think evidence through the last year and the coronavirus, we have a very self-preserving attitude, a very self-preserving mindset with things, with our money, with our time, with our energy. I mean, if you just think about the toilet paper epidemic alone, and going to the grocery store and thinking, I just need a little toilet paper, and yet everybody around you is grabbing, and so something inside of you begins to think, do I need to do that? Do I need to self-preserve here? And God is not like that. God is so not like that. He is not a God that is about self-preservation. In fact, our God is about absolute abandon in giving and in generosity. And I love that. And so I kind of want to just break this down just a little bit, because Paul's talking to the people and he's talking about giving, he's talking about finances, but it really extends beyond that. It's really a heart thing. And he says, I want you to give as you purpose in your heart. Okay. So there's an idea here that there is a predetermined plan of action. Okay. When we are approaching a situation and God is calling us or leading us to give, whether it be our money, whether it be our time, whether it be our energy, that we have to make a commitment. Okay, and that's what Paul's saying. He's like, I want you to commit to this. And I don't want you to do it grudgingly. I don't want you to do it with sorrow or grief or with an attitude of regret or obligation. He's like, I don't need that. And God doesn't need it either. I want you to do it with a heart of cheer, of just knowing you've been blessed and you want to give back as well. But I don't really want to focus so much on that part this morning. I want to focus on God, okay? Because it just brings a smile to my face when I read and I think about what little I bring and the abundance that God brings, and He loves to bring it. And so it says, and God is able to make all grace abound towards you, that you always, having all sufficiency in all things, may have an abundance for every good work. God is able. Now, if God was just going to give us grace, just grace, period, that would be enough. I mean, I don't know about you, but extending grace to people again and again and again, it can be difficult. And if God's just going to give us grace, that alone is enough. But it doesn't just say grace. It says all grace. And then it doesn't just say all grace. It says that grace would abound to me. That God has, if you can think of it this way, He has this infinite amount of grace that He lavishly wants to give us. And He doesn't hold back. There is not 1 ounce of a self-preservation attitude in the God that we serve. He desires to give grace. In fact, in John, we've been studying in John in our women's study, John 1, it says grace for grace or grace upon grace. And if you can think of it this way, it's like God saying, okay, here, I want you to come to me and I have grace for you today. Grace that is sufficient for you today. And when you feel like you've exhausted that grace, when you feel like you've spent it, just realize that I have a whole nother surplus of grace that I'm ready to pour out upon you. But the problem is, guys, is that most of the time we don't operate in the grace that God has for us. We operate in what we can do and what we are capable of and what makes sense to us. And God says, if you'll just cross over and tap in to this lavish grace that I have for you, you will be overwhelmed by what I can do through you and in your life. And he goes on and he says, so all grace abound towards you, that you always, having all sufficiency, okay? Having all sufficiency. And then he says, in all things. So that's a lot of all, okay? When God says all, he means all. You know, we say all and we kind of mean like, maybe some. No, God means all. But I want to focus here where he says all sufficiency. Okay, because this is interesting, because for Paul, he's talking to the Corinthian church and they were a very self-sufficient church. Okay, they had a lot going for them in the world's perspective. And so this is a direct jab at that worldly view of self-sufficiency. Okay, that I can do it. That if I just put my mind and my time and my effort, if I'm just a good planner or a good saver or a good investor, I can do it. And so what Paul is jabbing at is that mentality of self-sufficiency. The idea that man is the center. The idea that man is capable of doing whatever man wants to do. It's very American. It's part of the American dream. And so it's around us all the time. And we really have to be aware of it. And we really have to understand the truth as opposed to this dream, which is not truth. Okay. And so here, what Paul is doing, he's kind of sanctifying the term of sufficiency. He's saying, yeah, you know, the world thinks this, but I'm going to tell you here. And he says, God, not man, will supply everything needed. Everything that you need today, everything, friend, that you need today for happiness, for contentment, for peace, God will supply it. God wants to supply it. God waits to supply it. He desires to give you what you need today. And then he doesn't just meet the need. Okay, this is what's so amazing about God. He doesn't just meet the need. He doesn't just give the sufficient amount. No, he constantly is working in abundance. Okay, we serve an abundant God. He doesn't just have just enough for us. He wants us to move into abundance. And that's what it says here. It says, having sufficiency in all things may have an abundance for every good work. Okay, so not that you'll just have what you need to meet that need, but God's saying, you know, if you'll really trust me in this, if you'll really test me in this, if you'll really believe that what I'm saying is true, I have abundance for you. See, we don't like to overcommit, but God totally overcommits. We don't like to overextend ourselves when it comes to serving the Lord, serving people. But you know what? God constantly overextends himself. I think it's interesting that we'll overextend ourselves for ourselves, for self. We have no problem with that. But what about overextending yourself for God? What about him putting something on your heart that doesn't make sense, that doesn't add up, that you look at your schedule and think, I don't have the time for this, but God is putting it in your heart. And what I want to encourage you and challenge you with today is overextend yourself for God and just trust him and see what he can do. See the abundance that he wants to supply for every good work. Okay? And don't rely on your supply. Don't rely on your knowledge, on your bank account. Why don't we tap into God's abundance here? Because God gives back lavishly. It's not, and this is what's so cool, it's not for us, okay? He's not just giving it to us for us, even though there is a blessing in that as well, but he's giving it to us that we may then be able to meet the needs for every good work that he has for us, that he has purposed for us to do, the works that he's purposed for us to walk in, that we would have more than we need. when it comes to meeting the finances of that situation, that we would have more than we need when it comes to the energy we need to actually do the work, or the wisdom, or the ideas. We're approaching a time right now, we're going to do this great outreach with these kids. And, I'm like, Lord, I don't want my ideas. I want your ideas, because you're way more creative than I am. And he begins to supply that if we will look to him. And so the point that I kind of want to just end with today is that when it comes to giving, okay, when it comes to serving, when it comes to sowing, I want you to just continue to extend yourself. Continue to extend yourself, and don't give up. It's so easy to kind of get like to a place, and this is something that God's been doing in my heart, where you've been sowing for a while. You've been sowing and you're not seeing the harvest. You're not seeing all the fruit, and it can get discouraging, and it can get disheartening. But continue to sow. Continue to trust God. Continue to trust that he is a man who keeps his word. And this is what it says in Galatians 6:9. I love this. It says this, and let us not grow weary while doing good. So don't grow weary, all right? For in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. So don't lose heart today. Don't lose heart today, friend. Have a good day.